So welcome, everyone. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about this, an aspect of watching the mind. Sayadaw U Tejaniya talks about watching the mind, or mind watching, as Subhuti calls it, as a full-time job, not something that we can dip in and out of. What we're aiming for is to be watching the mind all of the time. And this points to the importance of having a really light effort that's sustainable. And means we're able to sustain a continuity of knowing what's happening as it's happening through all six senses, the five physical senses and the mind sense. So watching the mind involves keeping more attention in here, if you like, in here rather than out there. When attention goes out there too much, U Tejaniya says the things start to go unnoticed and they build up. Things in here often build up when there's too much attention out there. We invest more energy in certain things that are going unnoticed. Things like our thoughts feeding particular stories that can easily go unnoticed until it's turned into quite a strong momentum in the story and maybe quite a strong emotion going along with that. So often what that build up is a build up of reactivity that's gone unnoticed. So when we have a bit more attention and awareness on those inner processes that in here, rather than being with the objects, if you like, the concept objects of what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling, all those sorts of things. If we're with the process of thinking is happening, feeling is happening, and some idea of what those processes are, we'll be better off. An added benefit watching the mind and having a bit more of a sense of what's happening internally or in here is that we learn to take things less personally. When they're unnoticed in here, we're often identifying with what's happening. And when we watch the mind in this way, awareness grows stronger. But it doesn't build up in the same way that I've been talking about, those unnoticed things building up. And that's because awareness and right view are focusing on the present moment. That involves a certain sort of release or letting go of each. There's a moment, it's gone. It happens, it's gone. Next moment happens, gone. So there's a constant process of letting what's gone go, if you like, and noticing what's happening right now, what's happening in this moment. So I said before that watching the mind involves all six senses, the mind sense included, and particularly thinking or thoughts happening. When we're lost in thought, we're out there, if you like, for all intents and purposes. Even though it's happening, it feels like it's happening in here, but it's happening somewhere in those inner process, and we're out there. We're somewhere else other than being with what's happening when we're lost and caught up in our thoughts. So it's really important to be aware of thinking, one of those things that are happening in experience. It's in some ways a difficult object and in some ways an easy object because for many of us it's there so much of the time. Thinking, you might think more in terms of images, or it might be more in terms of words, or even sort of hearing but we can become aware of this mental process. So to some extent, two aspects, I think. So one is that knowing the content of a thought, so knowing what that thought is saying. This is usually, if we are giving attention to thinking, this is usually where most of our attention goes, and that can be what causes us to get lost in thoughts, just getting really caught up. But knowing the content of a thought in a very light way can help us see how these worlds that we get lost in, how they get created. And we know what sort of world, in the moment, we know what sort of world we're creating. And we know whether it's a world that is going to lead to less suffering for us, or whether it's a world we're creating that is going down the usual habitual tracks, sometimes quite negative tracks. So we want to have some attention on the content, but we want much more. In fact, the content will naturally be known if we also have attention with the process of thinking, how a thought feels in the mind. A thought as this more impersonal process that's going on, mental process. And watching thoughts in this way, in this second way, as mental processes, really helps grow awareness and right view. When there's less identification in the mind, when we're able to watch more impersonally, that's really helpful to the growth of awareness. Because awareness, I was saying last week, has this impartiality within it. It's an aspect of it. And so the worlds that we are growing through our thinking and getting lost in thinking, they tend to lose power when we're not so identified with them. And also we're more likely to not get lost in them. Something I've mentioned before, just finished with this. This is U Tejaniya talks about he talks about 50-50, having like 50% of your energy and attention out there, if you like, and 50% in here. And you might think, well, wouldn't you want more than 50% in here? But actually, usually we've probably got about 90% out there. So 50-50 is a big shift. It's a big rebalancing, if you like. In meditation, that might be a little bit different. You might find that there's a little bit more energy because there's more interest in those internal processes. So it's not a fixed thing, but certainly when you're walking around outside or doing some sort of work or in conversation with somebody, that 50-50 guideline can be very helpful. Okay, leave it there. If you'd like to set up for sitting.